All right, so chapter 9, the content for chapter 9 is less anatomy and physiology and more towards exercise prescription and exercise training. So chapter 9 is mostly introducing some terminology, and then after we finish with chapter 9, we'll get into a little bit of methodology. So let me just begin. Um, the overview of chapter 9 is that we start discussing some terminology, differences between endurance and strength and power and high intensity interval training, and different modes and different types of exercise training. It talks a little bit about the principles of training, like specificity of training and overtraining, and then we talk a little bit about different types of training programs, resistance training programs, isometric, eccentric, concentric, weight training versus non-weight training, and then it finishes up with some suggestions for anaerobic and aerobic power training programs. I think throughout this chapter, I'm going to have to allude a little bit to how I do some of these things with my gymnasts, because I think that's the most functional I can be. That's the most experience I have implementing a lot of this stuff. So hopefully I can give a little bit of insight, at least how I accomplish these things within the gym. Slide 3, we talk about muscular strength. In the gym, I don't think that gymnasts really use strength too much. I think that they use more power, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Muscle strength is defined as the maximum force that you can do in one contraction. Is either static strength, which is like strength that's like you don't have to move your joint angles. It would be more isometric, and then there's other dynamic strength, where the dynamic strength changes your arm or limb angles as you're doing the strength. An example of static strength would be like a chin-up hold. And an example of a maximum force static strength would maybe be a chin-up hold with as much weight as you can, like maybe some weight vests or something. And a dynamic strength would be, doing that chin-up hold, but as you pull down your arms and your shoulders, they change their angle in relation to each other. So that would be a dynamic, or the word dynamic means changing. So anytime a limb angle is changing, that would be a dynamic strength. The way to measure that is through a 1 repetition max test. So you could do a bench press 1 RM, you could do a curl up, you could do a squat 1 RM. In any event, strength is the amount that your body can lift with one maximum contraction. The reason why I don't think that gymnasts are usually using muscular strength is because gymnastics is a sport that manipulates body weight. Some of my guys are exceptionally strong and they can lift much more than their body weight, but in gymnastics they're only lifting their body weight, so they're never actually using a maximum contraction. They're always lifting half their body weight, half on one arm and half on the other arm, or half of the body weight with one leg and half of the body weight with the other leg. So the classic definition of strength, I don't think really applies to the guys in the gym. In regards to increasing your 1 repetition max effort, make sure that you start with a good proper warm-up so that you can get blood flow out of your intestines and your stomach into your muscles, so that you can get a release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, so that you have a little bit more heart rate, blood flow, oxygen to the muscles and things like that. So it takes a little time for these physiological processes to occur. So a good 5 to 7 minute warm up. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do a little bit warm up with very low intensity, and then you're going to start to increase intensity so that you can do your 1 RM max. But we'll go over 1 RM max and how to do that in different chapters. I believe that in gymnastics we're using more power than strength, and the difference between power and strength is that power has an equation that relates not only force but velocity. So it says that, and we'll go over the next slide, it's a little bit different. We're on slide 4. Power is equal to force times distance divided by time. Actually, the real equation is power is equal to force times distance, and force times distance is also known as work. So power is equal to work divided by time, but you can rewrite that equation so that it's power is equal to force times distance divided by time. And now if you look, power is equal to force times, another way of saying distance divided by time is velocity. So power is equal to force times velocity. So if you're not necessarily as forceful as one other person, but you can move that force at a quicker velocity, that will give you more power. That's why, like Ronda Rousey, the MMA fighter, she's not maybe necessarily as strong as some guys in the NFL, but she is really powerful because she can distribute whatever force that she has very, very quickly. When I think about gymnastics, it's more about power than it is strength. I want the guys to run quickly down the vault. I need them to hit the springboard very quickly, get on and off of the vault very quickly, get on and off of the floor, be able to push down very hard on parallel bars, and to be able to tap very quickly into the high bar. So I think that it's mostly power and not as much strength. So we try to manipulate power in our strength training, especially during the preseason. I'll talk a little bit more about our periodization as we do that. In any event, it seems as though power is more important than strength for some activities, specifically gymnastics. But it's really difficult to assess power. I'll show you how we're going to try to assess power later on. But typically, you can use some electronic devices. I added a fifth slide, and it's just another iteration of the equation of power. Work equals force times distance, and then power is equal to work divided by time. Therefore, power is equal to force times velocity. So you can increase power by lifting heavier and heavier weights, or you can keep the weight the same and you can manipulate velocity. So when I do power training in the gym, it's all about a stopwatch. It's all about trying to make them have a start point and an end point and make sure that my power assessments are truly standardized so that they have to accomplish a particular goal without cutting down range of motion. And then what we do is we try to time it and see if the guys can go faster and faster and faster. We do a lot of ladder work. We do a lot of, burpees and punching and getting up off the ground very quickly. But I also think that if I'm trying to manipulate the force side of the power equation as opposed to the velocity, then there's a real focus on muscle building and protein synthesis. And that's metabolically really costly. And some of my guys really can't keep up with caloric demands to make sure that their muscles keep growing and stuff. So as opposed to focusing on the force side of the equation, I think focusing on the velocity side of the equation might make it so that the guys who can't keep up metabolically are still going to be able to have an opportunity to keep up with their training. Slide 6 shows a picture of a machine called a Biodex machine, and you'll see that this person is doing a leg extension and leg flexion exercises, working on quadricep and hamstring power, and that leg is attached to a machine that has gears, and those gears can control not only the speed or the angle at which that leg is opening, flexing and extending, but it can also have information go into the computer that's going to get a sense of the power that this, and they'll be able to quantify power using similar machines like this. We're going to quantify power using med balls, and what I want them to do is do specific tasks with med balls that last for about 3 to 5 seconds, maybe 5 to 10 seconds. So we're clearly utilizing the ATP, the phosphocreatine system, and we're specifically testing the speed at which they can do these med ball tasks. So overhead med ball squat that you have to touch some type of target above, med ball rotation, med ball push the slams, med ball overhead slams, and see if we can time how long it takes for them to accomplish 5 slams in each direction, and see if we can utilize that to quantify power increases. Also could use vertical jump and stuff like that. So, all right, slide 7. We're talking now about muscular endurance, and towards the end of our gymnastics season, after we've already gotten stronger and we've already made hypertrophy demands, and now we're in the middle of the season where we're doing more routine-specific and skill-specific things, I don't really necessarily want to take the time to do as much strength training and strength and power. I want to maintain whatever strength and power they have as the season starts. And then towards the end of the season, I want to work muscular endurance. And muscular endurance is the ability to do repeated contractions for a long period of time. So when a person is doing pommel horse or they're swinging parallel bars or rings, and that rings routine lasts, 45 seconds to a minute, now they're out of their ATP PC system. They're into their fast glycolysis. We're switching to a new metabolic demand for that activity, and they're not working individual skills that last 5 to 10 seconds. Right? They're doing full routines, and now what I want to do is change the focus from building muscle strength and power to building blood vessels, hemoglobin, mitochondria size and density, so that they can utilize oxygen more effectively, so they get less tired during their routines. Usually, you can estimate your muscle endurance by doing exercises at a particular percentage of your 1 RM max and see how many reps that you can do. You can increase muscle endurance through muscle gains, but you can also muscle strength gains, but you can also increase muscle endurance through cardiovascular fitness increases, and also being metabolically efficient. Table 9.1 shows, let me just open up the slide so I can see it a bit, is an example of 3 different athletes. Athlete A is able to lift 100 kilograms, athlete B is able to lift 200 kilograms, and athlete C is able to lift 200 kilograms. So you would say, man, athlete A has a significant disadvantage. But in regards to because athlete B and C can lift, or they're twice as strong, but the individual athlete A can lift 100 kilograms in 0.6 meters, and that takes them 0.5 seconds to do so. And it takes athlete B 2 seconds to do so, and it takes athlete C 1 second to do so. So when you do that multiplication and you see whether or not an individual is powerful, it appears as though athlete A with 1,177 watts of power is much more powerful than athlete B, although athlete B is stronger. So power is a function of strength and velocity. So in my gym, if I'm concerned with having young kids do a lot of weight training and using kettlebells and dumbbells and barbells and stuff, all right, so then I can switch the focus to the velocity component and see whether or not we can make gains with power using velocity as a mechanism as opposed to speed. Aerobic power. Anytime you hear power is relating something to time. And aerobic power is the how fast the metabolic processes that utilize oxygen can occur to provide your body with ATP. So that's aerobic power. Synonyms for aerobic power, or ways that you can understand or estimate or quantify, is again using VO2 max. So higher VO2 max is an indicator that an individual has maximal aerobic power. The primary limitation, therefore, for aerobic power is the functioning of the cardiovascular system. If you can't pull oxygen in and you can't break down glucose to ATP, then you're not going to have the aerobic metabolic capacity to be able to produce force fast enough to have very, very much power. Anaerobic power is a very similar term. It just has to do with the metabolic processes that are void of oxygen. So the breakdown of oxygen with glucose, and the breakdown of ATP and the restructuring of ATP at a fast rate will give a maximum anaerobic power. They're somewhat difficult to assess anaerobic power. One is the Wingate test, which is a maximum 30-second biking challenge, and you can use various benchmarks during that particular test to get assessments of anaerobic power. Everybody is different, though. Everybody has different percentages of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. Everybody's got different limb lengths. Everybody's got somewhat different techniques. So not all athletes are equal. Not all athletes have the same muscle endurance, muscle strength, muscle power. So we're going to have to make sure that we can differentiate all of our instruction to all the different body types, the different muscle fiber types and percentages and things like that. So there are other things that are going to affect the training as well, not only from a muscular level, but there's neuromuscular components, Golgi tendon organs, flexibility, metabolism, cardiorespiratory, and hormone functions and regulations that are all gonna factor into this. And in any type of manipulation of an independent variable with hopes of seeing a dependent variable change, there are going to be high and low responders because of these factors. We are on slide 12 right now. Another training principle is that of specificity. If I need my athletes to get strong at jumping, it doesn't make sense to increase their push-up strength and their pull-up strength. If my athletes are interested in learning how to jump down from a high bar more effectively so that they can absorb the landing, it would make much more sense to practice jumping down from high surfaces and absorbing those landings than it would having them jump up and do box jumps and things like that. So the training that you do should, as closely as possible, match the exercise regimen or the sport performance criteria that you're interested in positively manipulating. So also, not only neuromuscularly is that the case, but it's also the case with metabolically. So, for instance, my athletes, when they do a floor routine, that's the longest they have in terms of doing an outright physical activity, is about a minute and a half. And that minute and a half is really utilizing fast glycolysis. So if we're going to do aerobic training, it doesn't make any sense for me to do slow glycolysis and for them to be on a treadmill for 35 minutes at a time. It's going to drop their blood glucose levels. Eventually, they're going to start using their fat-free mass as fuel, which I don't want them to. And we're not going to be training the actual metabolic systems that are necessary for them to carry out that fast glycolysis. So I'd rather them do like a minute and a half of sled pushes with as much intensity as possible, break down all the ATP, and then spend 5 to 7 minutes using oxygen to recover all of that broken down ATP. So what we do is we specifically manipulate the volume, the intensity, and the timing of the exercises that they're doing to not only match the exercises and match the sport performance aspects, but to also make it so that they're increasing power and strength, not equally, but focusing on power, and also making it so that we can positively impact the metabolic processes that are driving all of these things together. The principle of reversibility is if you exercise, you're going to start to increase strength and power and hypertrophy and potentially all of those variables, as long as you're following the ACSM guidelines to achieve those things. But in regards to reversibility, the principle of reversibility, if I stop exercising, then all of those hypertrophy gains and strength and power gains are going to start to become to reduce, to reverse. If you use it or lose it. So want to make sure that if you're trying to get strength and power gains, and we do strength and power in the off season, that we don't just as preseason and as the season starts, we don't just negate all of our strength training. What we do is we have to do things like maintenance, and we have to do other strategies to make sure that the strength gains that we did increase during the off season are not lost. In regards to progressive overload on slide 14, the way that your body gets stronger, both cardiovascularly and muscularly, is through stresses. And when you stress the system thinks, oh man, I'm being stressed right now. It could be the case that I could become injured. So hormones are released and things happen to prevent injury. Or it could be the case that your body thinks that, wow, I'm not going to be able to metabolically keep up with what's going on. So instead of hormones being released to help protein synthesis, hormones are released to increase cardiovascular functioning, like increasing vascularization, increasing hemoglobin count, increasing mitochondria density and size and functioning and things like that. So if you want to get stronger, you have to work out harder and harder and harder. And then what happens is that increased stress of your workout causes micro